back to the show, Business Mastery for Startups, Scale-Ups, and Early Stage Businesses with your host, Jerry Gadori. That's me. And this week's guest, we've got Steve Griffith. Stephen is a longtime sales professional, consultant, and fractional SVP or Senior Vice President. He's worked with some incredible companies like one you may possibly have heard of called Amazon. Steve, why don't you share a little bit about yourself and let's move on to our topic.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jerry. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. I have had an incredible experience in my career. I've had the opportunity to work not only for Amazon Web Services, but for Cisco Systems, Riverbed Technology, and a lot of early stage companies. Got involved in technology back in the mid-'80s and was doing things online before we had the internet. So I have some age and some miles on me, but that age and those miles, they give me great experience, and I've made lots of mistakes, which has now become wisdom that I love sharing and helping other people not make the same mistakes.
I always tell people the school of hard knocks is the best teacher there ever was, but they don't need to be your bruises. They can be somebody else's.
That's correct. I mean, and they're going to get their own bruises. In fact, if they don't get a few, they're probably not going to be as successful as they could be. But,
Yes.
There's ones you can avoid. And I'm happy to share what I've learned, see if I can help somebody else get there faster.
You know, it would be interesting to talk about, Steve. So you and I, again, we've been doing this for a long time. I remember pre-internet. I remember when email was the killer app. But I think back and I think, gosh, back in those days, getting people's contact info was the hard thing. Getting them to engage was pretty easy. If I made 125 cold outreaches, 25 people would pick up a phone. A solid 7 to 10 of them would have real conversations in one day. I can think of months where that doesn't happen now. How have you seen the kind of B2B sales outreach process evolve and change over time?
Yeah, it's really interesting. As we've gone through these evolutions and our generations, most of the people involved in B2B selling today grew up with a screen in front of them in some way or another. They're very comfortable there. And likewise, you and I both are, because we've been engaged in technology businesses for a long time. But not everyone is there. However, it has led some people to do what I call hide behind the screen. And if you know people that know me from my past, they're going to say, "Hey, Steve, that was you." And you're right. I made that mistake. I thought, what if I just, yeah, we all have. But, the emphasis on personal connection. I had an early experience where I was able to introduce video conferencing technology in 1992. We were then competing against how else do people communicate. But putting a face, having this video element was so much more powerful, and it still holds true today. But we went through COVID and everybody retreated into their nest, and we haven't all come out. And I think that is something that today we really got to watch. But the one thing you have to understand, we have what we call a buyer's journey. You and I could go off to buy something personally or professionally. I can do just endless research. I can discover everything. And so in the B2B selling world, we're not always prepared for how well informed our buyer is, and we begin throwing things at them. The number one thing that I would tell any founder or salesperson getting started, listen, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use those in proportion. It is something that we all lose. But it's extremely important.
If I could jump in there for one, because I don't want to glaze over it. Going back to what you said about a buyer's journey, I think it's also, if we're going to talk about that, it's also important that sellers realize that different products and services, different buyers have different buyers' journeys. So one example I like to give, I grew up in the talent and resource space. There is no buyer's journey in talent and resource. That company goes with whichever salesperson kicked their door in. But I also have been involved in SaaS sales. And in SaaS, there very much is. Most buyers, to your point, Steve, will go out and research, let's say hypothetically they're buying a CRM. They'll go out and research CRMs, narrow their focus down to 3 to 5 of those, do the online automated demo, narrow it down to one or two, and then engage the salesperson when they're ready to buy already. So
Right.
different products and services have different buyers' journeys.
Absolutely. I mean, an educated buyer, you may reach them and they have already decided that they're ready to buy from you. They just needed to make a connection. But all too often, we fail to stop and listen, and we
Yes.
start throwing things out there. When somebody says yes, you stop talking. You say thank you. You take the order. That heaven, help us if we have those opportunities presented to us often. We don't often enough. We usually have to go through a series of steps, a sales process, as it were, in order to communicate with the buyer that we understand their challenge and we want to help them solve their problem. And I refer to the buyer's journey and the salesperson's role in that. I call that the salesperson that navigates it well is an artist. They are able to paint a picture that says, when you and I work together, this is what's going to happen. Some people call it an outcome. Others, they call it, establishing values and different ways, different selling methods of getting there. But it is so critically important that you stop, you understand where the buyer is, understand what their pain is, you listen, and then you paint a picture and then go backwards to how you're going to arrive at that picture. A client of mine wanted to be able to go hunt more often and go in safaris in Africa. Well, there was no way that this person was going to be able to do it because they were too busy running their business and being the salesperson. It was a smaller business, under $2 million. What I had to do was help them create a process that other people could understand and pick up and do for them so that then they would have time and comfort to get out and do what they really wanted to do. And it goes with a theme that I have. People ask me, what's your why? Why do you do this? I do it for the smiles. I want to see a smile on the face of my client when we've created something that gives them ability to relax and be confident in the outcome. It's predictable, forecastable revenue. So we start with that sales artist, and you can find that person when you go interview them. Like you talked about talent. I mean, sometimes we're hiring the person that kicked in the door, but I need to make sure that that person can actually perform. Ask them to tell you a story about something that they did and what the outcome was. How did they get there? Ask them to paint a picture for you. It's one of the best ways in an interview. If all they do is come back with facts and figures and say, well, I talked to this company and we did this and it resulted in a 30% increase in revenue, that is wonderful, but you did not paint a picture for me.
Yeah, let's pause there for a minute and dial back to sales process. So we started with talking about inbound lead flow, which is nice, but for most of us, there's not enough of that to sustain our business. A lot of what we do is outreach based, which leads to the sales process you started describing. In my experience, somewhere between 5 and 10% at best of the people you talk to are ready to buy your product or service when you reach out to them. So we need some type of a system to keep us on their minds so when that time arises, they think of us and give us a shot. When you talk about sales process, is that what you're describing, or would that be a component of it?
It's a component of it. Where I would, in my work, start would be to look at their sales strategy. Exactly who are they targeting? And what does that opportunity look like? And even more so for a founder, what problem do you solve? That's what you have to focus on. You have to fall in love with the problem you're solving, not your solution, but the problem you're solving, because how you solve it and who you solve it for, who you solve it for is your market. And both how you solve it and who you solve it for is going to change over time. You need to be adaptable, right?
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely true. I would certainly agree with that. And in that vein, when we first started talking, we were talking about back in the late 90s and 2000s where people would pick up a phone and it was easier to engage. That's certainly not the case now. How do you work with people to get them to get to the point where their prospects will pick up a phone and will engage with them.
Yeah, I mean that goes hand in hand. I mean, the technology available to us is amazing. AI, if you're not using AI, you're going to fall behind. And AI, a friend of mine had introduced me to this idea. He said AI is not replacing jobs; it's supercharging the people. And I love that perspective. And so to get people to go out and meet face to face, to get them to go out, do a little research. I know that Jerry has written this incredible book. I know a number of things about you and your background. If I didn't do that research, you and I might not even be having this conversation, because upon our first conversation, after being introduced, you and I struck a conversation that I knew some of the things I was going to talk about would trip a trigger for you. I looked at your podcast. So in every encounter, do a little research so you know who you're talking to. But to get people to answer the phone, you have to add value. You have to be contextual to what's important to them. One of the selling methods out there, and when you build the process, we talk, Miller Hyman is one that's out there. And you find an economic buyer, you find a financial buyer, you find a technical buyer. You also identify influences. And then when you start doing outcome-based selling, the first thing you do is you try to figure out what is the ROI that they're trying to achieve by solving this problem. So there's different ways of getting to that person in a way that's meaningful, but you have to do the research to understand I've asked people, how do you get bonused? If a procurement person may get bonused on how well they can negotiate a contract and get the cost down from where it starts, or how much they save on the budget. Everybody has something that's important to them, both personally and professionally. It's important you learn that. That's when you are able to get people to answer the phone.
Yeah, so what you're describing is what I would call building an ICP. So coming to understand who my absolute ideal client profile is for my product or service, doing the research to the point that I could talk to that profile as if it were a person. And then when I find people who meet that profile on LinkedIn or wherever, I engage with them there. So
Absolutely.
I create content that would be relevant to them. As people engage with my content, I engage with them. I follow them back and engage with their content. And I found that by doing that, I can discover what makes them tick. And as they get familiar with seeing me, quote unquote, for those who are listening, on LinkedIn, then I found that when I reach out to them, I'm far more likely to reply because I'm not a stranger. We've engaged a bit, and they know that the things that I say are relevant to them.
Yeah. We've touched on a lot of things that are really important. Number one is understanding that buyer journey, right? And associating yourself with where that buyer is and aligning with them. Having meaningful communication, right? And don't sell on features. SaaS organizations, this is probably the greatest mistake that I see the SaaS organizations making today is they're instituting these PLG strategies, product-led growth strategies, and it's selling on features. That is a race to the bottom. You commoditize yourself immediately. You have to have a value proposition in there. Having a understanding your target market, your ideal client profile, having a unique value proposition, those are fundamentals that go into any sales plan. That's where I start. But you also kind of touched on something about how you blend certain parts of the business together, sales and marketing. There's a difference.
Yes.
Marketing has a robust responsibility to build your brand, to build awareness, to establish your footprint in that market by name and recognition. And sales is the beneficiary of that because when you speak to people, they recognize you already. Your marketing has worked. They may be using an advertising axiom that says, hey, I'm going to run this ad 7 times to get it viewed 3 times so I create one impression. And that one impression is all I need so that you recognize who I am when we speak. And it's the same thing. So understanding the role of marketing to go create leads for you and opportunities that recognize you. So when you get them in sales, it's up to you now to take them, qualify them, use a BANT model or a MEDIC model, as it were, to qualify that lead, and then move it into your sales process and understand where the buyer is. You may not need to do a demo. You may be able to skip right past all of those steps and go straight to a proposal and a close. You may not have to do a proposal. Just understand who's got the authority. That's to me, that's a summary of, use your sales and marketing effectively. Create that personalization by doing research when you communicate with them. Apply the advertising maxim so you do the follow-up. Do you realize it takes 5 follow-ups in most cases to get a deal? 90% of the salespeople stop after 1 or maybe 2.
Yeah, on that note, 2 things. One, before I move on to what I want to say right now, I tease a lot of my friends that own marketing firms that marketing and sales are natural enemies, because what marketing considers a lead, sales considers a waste of their time. And in all seriousness, I think the reason that perspective occurs is because there's a misalignment in what the ICP is and what urgent means. So one of the truisms is that there will always be problems in business. And just because someone's thinking about it or talking about it doesn't mean it's risen high enough for them to actually do something about it. And I think some marketers miss that.
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, BANT, budget, authority, need, and time. If you can tell me that you have established that all of those are present with the person I'm talking to, that they have a budget, they have authority, we've established a need, and there's a time frame they have to solve it, I can move forward. That's a well-qualified opportunity lead, and sales will love that. And marketing can bring it forward by qualifying it in that fashion.
100%.
Yeah. So, it's important that you understand what the role of each is. But yeah, I mean, they love to point fingers. Oh, marketing's terrible. They're not, the message is wrong for the people we're talking to. Or marketing says, well, you're talking to the wrong people. Right. So it's one or the other. And coordinating with marketing, it's something I do all the time. In fact, I almost always introduce a marketer into my clients if they don't already have one, because I can't create an effective sales strategy and produce an average of 30% growth in the first year, like I do with most clients, if we don't have effective marketing. You can't get there.
Yeah, and so there's a number of skills that startups typically lack that they add as they grow. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, one of the things that I've seen change over the last 15 or 20 years is that CMO comes on far earlier, because companies recognize that it's more difficult to engage with their prospects. So if they can create effective marketing that creates sufficient awareness, it lowers that bar some so that their salespeople can get that engagement. And again, I think that's one of the changes in business-to-business outreach now versus early on in the Stone Ages when we started, was that, the founder just expected the salesperson to knock the door in. And now we're acknowledging that model doesn't work.
Right. I mean, all too often, I think founders engage in this activity. They're led to believe that you have to create a pitch deck and you have to go get funding. Then you can get started. In today's world, I don't think you're going to get funding unless you have gotten started. More times than not, they want to see traction, revenue traction, proof that you have built something that can grow. So it may take you to invest in marketing and sales before you go and do your pitch.
And that's assuming that you have the type of business that's fundable anyway. A lot of folks forget that less than 15% of all businesses are VC fundable. Regardless, if you're in services, for example, very rarely are you going to get funding. And if you do, it's after you cross a significant threshold, like 10 million in revenue. And that funding is a PE firm buying you. So So
Yeah,
that services are an entirely different animal.
it is, and I was meeting with a CFO who had worked with a group, a PE firm, and she was CFO for a group of the portfolio companies. And we were discussing about, the appropriateness of seeking funding for a business. The healthiest businesses are the ones that bootstrap themselves. And the more you can do that, the better off you are. There is a time and place for funding, but it's not for everybody. Just as you said, it could be the kind of business you're doing, or it could be that you haven't really established the traction that you need. But if you don't spend time and start with your business plan, your mission, your vision, your objectives, and your core values, build a clear understanding of who your obtainable market, that SOM, TAM, SAM, SOM, and you can only do that if you understand who your ICP is. Those are all fundamental elements. And sometimes I find that that's what I have to go back and work on with a client before we build a sales strategy and a sales process. And then we can then establish what are the competitors. One of the hardest things in sales is to get a maybe.
Yeah.
I can deal with a yes and I can deal with a no.
Yeah.
Right?
In my world, maybe is usually just 5 letters to say no. But
Yes.
but going back to money real quick, one of the truisms I've learned over my time in business about money is that the less that you need money, the easier it is to get. And the less that you need money, the more control you have over the terms. So
Yeah.
circling back to our early stage founder looking for funding, the more they can show potential investors a viable business that has traction, that's moving in the right direction, that's beginning its hockey stick surge, the more likely they are to get favorable terms and not have to give away their equity in order to get the funding that they needed.
Without question. And I mean, that holds true in personal finance. You get more credit card offers when you don't need them.
No, exactly. I tell a story often of Apicero. We were bootstrapped, self-funded. Gosh, we had already won Partner of the Year at Salesforce twice before our growth just started to outstrip and we had to slow down. And Salesforce came to us and said, hey, guys, why are you slowing down? You guys are killing it. And we said, well, we're a little short on funds. And they funded us. That was our big
Yes.
funding raise.
Yeah.
Salesforce, the VC group, just funded us. But you kind of mentioned in the beginning, but I want to circle back because we didn't unpack it at all. If you could give a startup founder, early stage business leader any one piece of advice, what would that advice be, Steve?
The one piece of advice I'm going to give to them is build something where you love the problem that you're solving and prove that you have the ability to solve it for the right people by selling it yourself. That doesn't mean they're going to build the sales organization themselves, but they will then have the confidence to move forward with the rest of it. Don't hide behind the screen and sell on features. Get out and talk to people and actually sell it. I think founders that have actually been out and sold what they developed are the strongest founders I've met.
I completely agree. And I'll take you one step further on that. When I'm advising a founder, I tell them universally, until you can define at least a basic sales process, you have no business reaching out to potential salespeople for 2 reasons. Number one, you have no guidance for them. You're just asking them to invent it themselves. And in order to do that, you'll have to bring in a very senior salesperson who's going to want an arm and a leg because they're taking all the risk. It's their
That's right.
reputation if they're not able to do that. So they're going to be looking for a chunk of equity. They're going to be looking for a significant salary, for an even more significant comp plan. No. As the founder, you have to be the one, or at least somebody on the founding team. You have to be the one until you can figure that out.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, and it's so important. Many founders are very technically oriented and they don't see sales as their comfort zone. Well, I can tell you, getting out of your comfort zone is the one thing that's going to make you successful. Challenging yourself, right? Those are things that are so important. I've been challenged, to the point I've been fired. I've been, I've burned bridges. I've done it all. So you don't have to. Let me help you. But an early stage company quite often will take a check from anybody willing to write it for anything that's even closely related to what they're doing. And it leads them to believe that they have built a business. I really frown when I get inside with a business and they show me how they got to where they are. And I can see that they may not have ever sold the product that they say they built, but they got money because they took checks for things that were around it, but not it. So be very certain to prove your business before you go off and start trying to build it with other people and other people's money.
You mentioned selling features a couple of times, and it reminds me of the old saying from Ogilvy back in the 60s when he said people don't buy a drill, they buy the hole in the wall that they need the drill for. And I take it one step further and I say people don't buy it for a hole in the wall that they need it for. They buy that drill to make that hole to be able to hang that picture of their family. And the
That's
closer
correct.
you can get to talk to them about their family, the more likely they are to buy because you're speaking to their need. And they don't care about the journey there until they know that you can get them to their need.
That's right. I mean, it's just like, with the guy that wanted to go do more safaris and do more hunting. He wanted to be able to hang a picture of himself, with his successful safari. He's going to buy that drill. And why is he going to buy it? Because he's been able to go on that safari. My job is to make sure that he can go do what he wants to do.
Exactly correct.
Yeah. So, and that's, as I work with clients, I work diligently to make sure that we document everything that founder has learned. And if they've learned nothing, I have nothing to document. So again, go out and do it yourself. Try it. Then you have an appreciation for how difficult it is. So when you do hire a salesperson, you're not afraid to pay them. Everybody says they want me to come in and do it for equity. Well, I will do an equity position with you after we've spent 6 months together. You're going to have to pay me for the 6 months, but I have no idea until I get to that 6-month mark whether you have a viable business or not. And those are important points, right? So we've got to put proof in there. And with salespeople, I just responded to somebody the other day. We were talking about compensation. I said, there is no cap. If they can sell and go beyond the quota that you've established, keep paying them because you're making money and you don't want to draw them into the wrong behavior where they stop selling because you stop paying. So, all of those things are so important. And it's just trying to figure out. But people have a hard time paying for sales often because they say, well, anybody can sell. They give it a low regard. You know what?
I run into that problem often with sales and recruiting. And, I am a fan of sharing some equity, but the truth is startups in the United States have a 7% success rate. So more often than not, that equity in 100 pennies is worth $1. So,
yes.
So you've got to be willing to pay. And I used to run a workshop called How to Prepare to Hire Your First Salesperson. And you've talked about several parts of it already, Steve. If you don't understand the sales process, how can you possibly manage somebody? You don't know what success looks like. You don't understand how long it takes to make a sale and what the sales cycle and sales velocity are. How can you possibly manage them? And it's madness. And the second part, you hit on it masterfully as well, is the comp plan has to reward the behaviors that lead to success. So very often I'll see owners and they're like, well, I'm going to put a cap after a year. We're going to stop paying commission on that or this or that. I'm like, you're incentivizing them to stop caring at a year. How is that going to affect the life of your long-term clients? They just don't think that all the way through. And I just remind them, if your comp plan is in tune, the more you're paying the salespeople, the more you're earning. If your comp plan's out of tune, it has to be fixed, but don't make it punitive.
That's correct. I couldn't agree more. I work with founders and business owners all the time. And, besides just how to build a sales strategy and a sales process. Number one, a CRM. We're going to have a CRM. We are not running your business on a spreadsheet or a notebook. We're going to make that CRM useful to the salesperson. It's not a substitute for the weekly call detail report that you would have turned in, right?
Too many people buy Salesforce and configure it to be able to write effective sales reports, which is useful, but make it so unpleasant for the salesperson that they won't use it.
That's right. So AI is a great technology, and it should be everywhere in your business. Again, we're supercharging the people. I love what my friend has put forward there. And we use AI to facilitate getting information into the CRM. And then that way the salesperson doesn't come back to their hotel room on the road and have to type in the day's call notes. Just dictate it into the phone and we'll pop it in there for you. Transcribe it and put it in there. Then we're going to go through the week's opportunities. We're going to come back and we're going to give you some ideas of what you might be able to do to accelerate the calls, accelerate the close, or trigger a call to somebody that was waiting on inventory to arrive. All sorts of things that can be done to make a CRM useful for a salesperson. And when you do that, anytime you do something that helps a salesperson, they're going to use it. If you're going to make their life easier and you're going to accelerate money into their pocket, because quite frankly, salespeople are coin operated. That's what makes them great.
I often tell people that sales is one of the only positions where if they're not money driven, they're going to struggle to succeed. And
That's
the
correct.
comp plan needs to play to that. One other quick note, then we should wrap up soon. One other quick note when it comes to comp plans is if you have to be both an attorney and a CPA to understand the comp plan, your salespeople won't follow it.
That's right.
They won't stay.
Exactly. When they're standing in front of a client and they're talking about a deal, they should be able to calculate in their head what their commission is.
Yep.
Right? It's just like a rule I have for some of the groups that I'm a part of. If I wouldn't ride in the car with you for 4 hours there and back, I don't want to be in the group with you. All those simplification things. I'll say this, Jerry, it only takes a quarter for us to evaluate and begin designing new sales organization structures, processes, strategies, and then another quarter for those to begin taking effect. And, anybody that misses a quarter and doesn't seek help, keeps, if you keep doing the same thing over and over and expect a different result, it's the definition of a fool. So don't be a fool. Give me a call.
Yeah, I always tell my teams, whether they're salespeople, recruiters, or anything else, I'm tolerant of mistakes the first time you make them, and my door is always open to help you. But if you wait until I come to you with a problem that you knew about, if we uncover you understood you had a problem and I had to come to you for it, it becomes a larger problem.
That's correct.
So
you should have been having that conversation with your employee, what I called keep, start, stop. I took it from somebody that I worked for. Here's what I want you to keep doing. Here's what I want you to start doing. And here's what I want you to stop.
I like that. I like that a lot. Well, listen, Steve, clearly you and I could talk all day. So let's wrap the show up here. Happy to have you on another time. But before we move further, Steve, how can people who want to learn more about you and get in touch, how can they reach you?
Sure. Thank you, Jerry. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's always the easy way. You can call my phone. I answer my phone, even the ones that say spam risk, 210-601-0007. I know how to hit a delete button and how to hang up a call, so I'm okay with extra communication. You can find me on a website, salesbuilderstx.com. My company is Sales Builders Texas. I am powered by the Sales Xceleration organization. I work with over 200 colleagues, all of which have the kind of background and experience I do, and we share common frameworks and IP to help and support each other in building sales programs we've done it now for over 6,000 small businesses across the U.S.
That's awesome. And for all you longtime listeners, you already know this, but for any new listeners, don't crash your cars trying to write that down. It will be in the show notes. Get safely where you're going. You can get it there. For everybody else, as always, continue being awesome and growing incredible companies. Steve, thank you again.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Thank you for having me.